So today we should commemorate this. In 1949, at the end of the Second World War, in Japan, where the atom bombs were used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So in these two places, two bombs were dropped. I've been to both the places. First in Hiroshima. So when I reached there, where the atom bomb actually was thrown, so there is a building for some committee or something, and some of the beams, iron beams, were actually could be seen. They had melted. So because of the atom bomb, people who were survivors of the atom bomb I've met, who suffered the burns. And then also I was in Nagasaki as well. So when I reached these two places where the bombs were actually used, it felt quite strange. So of course, when people are in this kind of situation of war, which is driven by anger, we tend to actually think of completely destroying, eliminating the other parties. But basic human nature is compassionate. So we are actually hoping for a demilitarized, denuclearization of the world. So today, the first bomb was, today is the day commemorating the using of the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. And since I've been there, whether we are able to achieve the peace in the world or not, first we should work within ourselves to bring about peace within ourselves. And then, as human beings, we should hold dialogues amongst ourselves. We can express our own aspirations so that the other can also listen and understand us. And so just as we do not want any suffering, likewise we should think of not causing suffering to others. And so we should have mutual understanding. So even if people may be at discord in the same family, and in any way the members of the family would do anything they could to resolve the differences. And so the time for thinking of completely eliminating one's enemies, the so-called enemies, is outdated today. And so I thought this, we should remember this event that happened in Hiroshima. You have not been there, so since you have not been there, but I've been there, so this is something, the site itself is something unbearable. So any kind of weapons, the atomic weapons and so forth, if we could create a world free of all these nuclear weapons and other weapons, I mean, then there would be a very stable and lasting peace in the world. So there are those of the natural calamities due to global warming and so forth. So because of this global warming, we are also naturally facing lots of problems. And on top of that, if we still remain passionate about using arms, this is something unnecessary. And we are living in India, where there has been the practice of ahimsa and karuna, nonviolence and compassion. So India is a pioneer nation for these two practices. And so when we learn about these the mental afflictions, disturbing emotions which cause us suffering, though we may not be able to overcome completely, eliminate these mental afflictions, we could at least work towards reducing them from within our mind. So during this teaching on in praise of dependent origination, in the refutation of arguments by Master Nagarjuna, in the beginning he pays homage to the Buddha for teaching dependent origination, through which he says one eliminates all the defilements within our mind stream. So birth and disintegration or death are overcome through, this verse says, birth and disintegration are overcome through this teaching on dependent origination. And so, on the basis of this teaching on dependent origination, the Buddha is a unique teaching, a unique teacher. Although there had been many teachers in India, religious teachers, spiritual founding teachers in India, the one who taught dependent origination, that things are established by way of relation and connection with others. It is only the Buddha Shakyamuni who gave such a teaching. As I said yesterday and the previous days, the Nalanda scholars analyze the teaching of the Buddha, and so having done that, what they found is that the teaching of dependent origination is very meaningful and significant. So it can be applied to any situation or any events in life and so forth. And so mainly we are followers of Master Nagarjuna and his students like Master Aryadeva and so forth have explicated the teaching of dependent origination through scriptural quotations and reasoning, but primarily through reason. So even today, whether you believe in Buddhism or not, and generally speaking, whether you believe in a religion or not, this conception or the understanding of dependent origination is very beneficial. So, dependent origination, whether we are believers or not, should understand the significance of this dependent origination, and what is meant by dependent origination should be understood. So, what we should investigate is whether things have any objective existence, independent existence in and of themselves or not. This must be investigated. Just this is how things appear to us. So finally, what we should try to gain certainty in is that things don't exist the way they appear to us, but that they exist by way of dependence. So when we grow anger or attachment, what happens is the objects that we look at appear to be absolutely bad or good. And accordingly, there is this inappropriate perception of them as being absolutely bad or good. And so when I have discussions with quantum physicists, so I didn't have the chance to ask these quantum physicists to ask whether they, as quantum physicists, have experienced less emotions or of attachment, anger, and so forth, or not. Though things do appear to us as if they have some objective independent existence, the quantum physicists say that things, when you actually delve into the nature of things, going down to the atomic particles, subatomic particles, and so forth, they do find that there's nothing really existing solidly as they appear. So I need to still find an opportunity when I meet with quantum physicists to check whether they have less emotions or not. So Master Nagarjuna, through scripture and reason, and mainly reason, said that there's no phenomena or nothing which exists objectively. So what actually affects us, helping us, or harming us, these different things, how do they exist? As they appear to exist from their own side because of our negative emotions. So when we look at things, when we feel relaxed and calm, so when we are not emotionally disturbed and look at things, you will be able to see that things don't exist the way they appear to you. So this needs to be investigated by those who seek to understand the nature of things. And so there had been many learned masters of Tibet, and one of them was Master Tsongkhapa, who studied all the different great treatises of India, and then compared and contrasted them, those writings from the different philosophical proponents of different philosophical schools. And so the thorough investigation into these writings of the Indian masters, one of the best Tibetan masters was Master Tsongkhapa. So we were on verse number 30. We finished that, and today, now 31. So having done analytical, critical analysis through, critical analysis, so the Buddha's teaching with regard to the extensive path, Master Tsongkhapa says that if you do this kind of critical analysis into the teaching of, then you will gain certainty into the vast path. And next 31, you who speak excellently by seeing as it is. For those who train in your footsteps, all degenerations will become remote, for the root of all faults will be undone. And so the Buddha himself went through the process of learning, and then whatever he has studied and learned, he reflected on them and then understood that all the destructive or negative emotions arise through ignorance, which perceives things to have some objective existence in themselves, and the wisdom sees that there is no such existence. So, but those who turn away, now 32, from your teaching, though they struggle with hardship for a long time, faults increase evermore, as if being called forth, for they make firm the view of self. And so, apart from the followers of the teaching of the Buddha, the non-Buddhist traditions of India believe in an Atman, which is distinct from the psychophysical aggregates, the body and mind constituents. And on the basis of that idea, they believe in past and future lives. So in a way, this belief in Atman or soul does seem to help them in their belief of past and future lives. So it has, these non-Buddhist traditions of India had been helpful to their followers in the past, as well as it is proving beneficial today too. But those who turn away from your teaching, though they verse number 32 and 33, Amaho, when the wise comprehend the differences between these two, why would they not at that point revere you from the depths of their being? And so, as there's a Tibetan saying, the quality of a turquoise could be known or through by comparing different turquoises. And the quality of a horse racing could be also could be checked by actually letting the horse run and whipping it. So, of course, the different religious traditions have different messages, such as love, compassion, and so forth, which are admirable. But there is difference in philosophical position. So, within the teaching of the Buddha himself, the followers in the Nalanda tradition have done investigation into the teaching of the Buddha and then made this distinction between the definitive and the interpretable meanings of the teaching. Because they say that if we accept the teachings, the words of the Buddha literally, there are those teachings which cannot be taken literally, and therefore they should be interpreted. And they are provisional because of the Buddha having taught them for a certain purpose and reason, whereas there are other teachings which cannot be interpreted otherwise, but the meaning remains how the Buddha has taught, and those are definitive teachings. Verse number 34. So when the Buddha first taught the Four Noble Truths, he went through the nature of the Four Truths by saying, this is the truth of suffering, and so forth. And then he also went into the four different aspects of suffering, four different aspects of the origin, and so forth. And so there has not been any other teacher who taught this. So suffering and the origin of suffering are taught on the basis of understanding causality. And because suffering and the origin of suffering can be overcome, and therefore there's a possibility for cessation. He taught cessation. So His Holiness quotes from Mahayana Uttara Tantra, which says the stains or the defilements are adventitious, whereas the qualities are the intrinsic within us. So which means that in the intrinsic nature of the mind, the defilements are not in the intrinsic nature of the mind, whose essence is clarity and awareness. And it is also mentioned in the Mahayana Uttara Tantra that there's nothing to be removed, there's nothing to be added by seeing the reality as it is. And one would be liberated, which is referring to, from the point of view of emptiness. So the distorted nature of mind is not an intrinsic nature of the mind itself. So it says in verse number 34, let alone your numerous teachings, even in the meaning of a small part, those who find ascertainment in a cursory way, this brings supreme bliss to them as well. Verse number 35, alas, my mind was defeated by ignorance, though I have sought refuge for a long time in such an embodiment of excellence, I possess not a fraction of his qualities. So Rinpoche himself, though he had gone through arduous study of the Dharma, and he studied Dharma very extensively and gave a lot of teachings by teaching the different 17 different script commentaries on Abhisamaya Alamkara together at one point even, and then he also gave other teachings extensively as well. But in the end, at the exhortation of Manjushri, he had to leave everything behind, teaching and everything behind. But Some people had actually said that this would actually harm the Dharma if he went into hermitage, and that he will not be able to serve the students who needed his teachings. And Manjushri, when it was referred to Manjushri by Tsongkhapa, Manjushri said, whether you will be beneficial to the Dharma and sentient beings, I would know that. If you don't go into hermitage to live as a hermit, even your life would be you would live a shorter life. And so this shows that it's not enough just to be expert in the words of the Dharma without the practice. And therefore, Rinpoche went into hermitage. So while he had the foundation of the Dharma through his study, extensive study, and then through his meditation practice, he was able to develop the genuine path within himself. And so, therefore, he wrote this text. And verse number 36 says, nonetheless, before the stream of this life flowing towards death has come to cease, that I have found slight faith in you. Even this, I think, is fortunate. And number 37, among teachers, the teacher. And then verse number 38 too. And so, beginning with the teaching on Four Noble Truths, the Buddha gave teachings based on dependent arising. So the reason why he gave this teaching is to eliminate our grasping and clinging to an independent self, thereby developing the path that is the antidote to this grasping, thereby making us able to attain true cessation within ourselves. So all that you have number 38 and 39 now. So the Buddha taught the path to shun the unwholesome actions, and cultivating the wholesome actions. Alas, your teaching is such, in whosoever's ears it falls, they all attain peace. And so the teaching of the Buddha is such that it helps us to avoid birth into the lower realms of existence and bring us to the higher realms, and finally to this deathless state of liberation. And so this is amazing. And so this should be understood, that it should be understood that this attainment of enlightenment and the deathless state of enlightenment is possible through the combination of the path, the method, and wisdom. Verse number 40. So there's no question. Nobody would question the virtue of bodhicitta, which holds others dearer than oneself, and thereby overcoming that of this self-cherishing attitude. Whereas on dependent origination, what is explained by the Buddha's teaching is that things have no independent self or existence. And so there is no way to counter that teaching, because it is said that things are dependently originated, and therefore Nobody can say that things don't exist, because they do exist by way of dependence, whereas they don't exist independently because of dependent origination. And so it's neither existent nor non-existent. So, through the teaching of the Buddha, what the aim, what our goal is that of the temporary attainment of higher rebirth and the ultimate attainment of liberation. And therefore, it says it overcomes all opposing challenges. It's free from contradictions between earlier and later paths. It grants fulfillment of being's true aims. For this system, my joy increases evermore. And then 41 says, for its sake, you have given away again and again over countless eons, sometimes your body, at others your life, as well as your loving kin and resources of health. And seeing the qualities of this teaching pulls hard from your heart, just like what a hook does to a fish. Sad it is not to have heard it from you. And then 43, 44, here too, as I reflect on your words, I think blazing with the glory of noble marks and hallowed in a net of light rays, this teacher in a voice of pristine melody spoke thus in such a way, and so forth. So we have not been able to be there during the time of the Buddha, nor those of the Master Nagarjuna and his disciples and followers. But their teachings remain for us. So the Buddha's words are still extant, and Master Nagarjuna's 6 collections of reasons also are there for us to study, and for us Tibetans, without having. So these translations of the Master Nagarjuna's works and so forth are complete translations of the Sanskrit words. They have the translators of the past past Tibetan kings and translators and masters have done such a good job of translating these texts so authentically without leaving even a single word of the Indian Sanskrit treatises. And then the Tibetan scholars, when they study the Buddhism, and what they do is they actually go back to the sources, which are the Kanjur and Tenjur, and then do rigorous critical analysis into the teaching by comparing and contrasting the different philosophical assertions and so forth. And therefore, since we also have the opportunity to do such critical analysis into the teaching, we could actually see what, or have some idea what kind of person Master Nagarjuna must be through his writings. And then the Buddha himself lived as a simple monk without having any secretaries or treasure. People looking after his treasures or anything like that. But he practiced Vinaya, carrying the begging bowl and going into the towns begging for food. Whereas in Tibet, the ladangs or the Lama institutions developed as the Lamas also became heads of the people, leaders of people and so forth. And so the Lamas have also become like rulers of the different places in Tibet. So the Buddha himself, so we should actually reflect on how the Buddha lived his life, and Master Nagarjuna and so forth also lived their life as simple Buddhist monks. And then they spoke thus in such a way that the instant such a reflection of sage forms appears in my mind, it soothes me just as the moon rays heal fever's pain. And then this excellent system, most marvelous, some individuals who are not so learned have entangled it in utter confusion, just like the tangled Belvadza grass. So Belvadza is a type of grass which gets entangled. And so in India, there were different philosophical traditions, philosophical schools, such as within the Nagarjuna's tradition of Madhyamaka, there were the middle way schools of Savatantrika and Prasangika, and so forth. Seeing this situation, verse number 47, I strove with a multitude of efforts to follow after the learned ones and sought your intention again and again. And so not just being contented with what your Lama says, what one's Lama says, Master Tsongkhapa carried out investigation and comparing the different treatises. And next 48 says, at such a time as I studied the numerous works of both our own middle way and others. So the other school here refers to Chittamatra and with the middle way could be the Prasangikas and those of the Savatantrikas. My mind became tormented ever more constantly by a network of doubts. And so, since there were different philosophical assertions of different Indian Buddhist masters, though the Buddha himself already taught that things have no independent self-identity, the Indian masters gave thought to that teaching, and therefore we have the philosophical assertions of Chittamatra and then the Dhyamakas. The night lily groves of Nagarjuna's treatises, Nagarjuna, whom you prophesied, would unravel your unexalt vehicle as it is, shunning extremes of existence and non-existence. So the dependent origination, through dependent origination, you actually shun both the extremes that are mentioned here, so which is the middle way. And so Master Nagarjuna was prophesied to reveal or explicate this teaching of dependent origination, the reality or the suchness of it. And then his followers, such as Master Bhaviveka and others, the great masters, all these great masters, top scholars, amongst them, it says, illuminated by the garland of the white lights of Chandras, Chandra, well-uttered insights, Chandra, whose stainless wisdom orb is full, who glides freely across scripture's space. So Chandra is the name here referring to Master Chandra Kirti. So Chandra means moon in Sanskrit, and the master's name is Chandra Kirti. So who dispels the darkness of the extremist hearts and outshines the constellations of false speakers. When through my teacher's kindness I saw this, my mind found a rest at last. And so Master Chandrakirti's commentary on Mula Madhyamaka Karika, the meaning commentary, which is Madhyamaka Avatara, and the word commentary, which is Prasana Pada, clear words. So I do read these texts, the Madhyamaka Avatara's auto-commentary. So when I went through my teacher's kindness, teachers such as Master Rendawa, who was a human form of a teacher for Master Tsongkhapa, and then Manjushri in the form of a deity, through their kindness, I saw this. My mind, when I saw this, my mind found a rest at last. So when Master Tsongkhapa faced difficulty in understanding the intent of Master Nagarjuna, he found Master Chandrakirti's writings very helpful. And so, not only reading the scriptures, but he also went through the practices of purification of negativities and accumulation of merit. And so, combining his practice with his learning, he was able to dispel all doubts about the teaching of the Buddha. Of all his deeds, your speech is supreme. Of all your deeds, your speech is supreme. Within that too, it is this very speech. So the wise should remember the Buddha through his teaching of dependent origination. And so though regarding the Buddha's deeds, there are those of miracles, which are physical deeds, and so forth. The main deed for us is his deed of speech or giving teachings. So the wise should remember the Buddha through this teaching of dependent origination. And so regarding the author of this text, who he is, it is referred by this verse number 53. Following such a teacher and having become a renunciant and so forth. And so Chögyö Döndrup Rinchen, who was the original teacher of Master Tsongkhapa, advised him to go to central Tibet and gave him some instructions in verses, whereas later Master Tsongkhapa recited some of those verses that he could remember, and he also said that he couldn't remember some of the verses. And so according to that advice from Chögyö Döndrup Rinchen, he carried out his pursuit, the study of Dharma. And then there was other... Yangde Rinpoche had quite a strong Khamba accent. He said Shengawa rather than saying Jengawa, as His Holiness would understand. So that was what he was saying. And so Jengawa was another teacher whom Rinpoche met in central Tibet. And then Rendawa was one of the main teachers. And then in the Nyingma tradition, Lodok Drupchen, the great accomplished master of Lodok, he has written, Gyö Tsongkhapa has written a text which is called Shulen Düzi Menchok, the supreme ambrosial medicine, which is a response to the questions. And so he was a great master, Lodok Drupchen. Namkha Gyaltsen was his proper name. When they met, Gyö Rinpoche, when they met the first time, Gyö Rinpoche saw Lodok Drupchen Namkha Gyaltsen as Vajrapani, and And then Lodar Drupchen Namga Gelsen saw Je Rinpoche as Manjushri. So in this book, Shulen Duzimenchok, there are lots of Nyingma terminologies found, you can find there. And therefore, what this shows is Je Tsongkhapa studied all the different treatises belonging to the different Tibetan Buddhist traditions, not just taking them on the basis of faith alone, saying, oh, how nice, and he actually studied them and then actually analyzed and investigated into their content, investigated their content as well. And therefore, his own writings, Je Rinpoche's own writings, make up 18 volumes, which are excellent writings. And then Buddhan Rinchen Drup, who is called the Omniscient Buddhan, had written many books. There are very few explanations on the great treatises of India. And I have also read all the books by the great 5 great Sakya patriarchs. So regarding the Lamde, the path, the result in the path, I mean, there are very good writings or books of the Sakya traditions. Within the Lamde, there are those which are teachings meant for assembly, and also the teachings meant for specific disciples. And then Drukpa Pema Karpo's writings also I have read from the Drukpa lineage. So all these great, all these masters of the different Tibetan Buddhist traditions are very good. But I find the quality of Master Tsongkhapa's writings excellent. And then there are differences in his writings between those that were written in the earlier part of his life and those written in the latter part of his life. There are differences in his position. And so, particularly with regard to the view of the middle way. So his commentary on the Madhyamaka Avatara, illumination of the thought or the intent, is differs greatly from his writings on Madhyamaka in his earlier part of his life. And so Master Tsongkhapa, having done the study, having combined the study, reflection, and meditation, he says, since it is due to my teacher's kindness, I have met with the teaching of the unexalted teacher. I dedicate this virtue. 53. Following such a teacher and having become an renunciate, having studied the conqueror's words, not too poorly, this monk who strives in the yogic practice, such is the depth of his reverence of the great seer, to the great seer. And then dedication verse number 54. So not only to say that the Buddha was a precious master, but when he sees through his analysis, critical analysis of the teaching of the Buddha, and found him to be someone unique amongst all the teachers, he says, he says, may I always be filled with those who find conviction in the, may it be filled with those who find conviction in the teacher by understanding the teaching's true nature. So regarding the different religious traditions of the world, they were taught by the different founding teachers in order to help their followers. They were given in accordance with the followers' temperament. And within Buddhism, of course, there are different philosophical traditions. So on the whole, all the different traditions, the different religious traditions, are helpful to their followers. And then, according to the circumstances also, the different teachings evolved. And so amongst all these teachers, the dependent origination was taught by the Buddha alone, Shakyamuni. May I never falter, even for an instant, to uphold the excellent way of the sage, which illuminates the principle of dependent origination through all my births, even giving away my body and life. May I spend all day and night carefully reflecting by what means can I enhance this teaching achieved by the Supreme Savior through the strenuous efforts over countless eons. As I strive in this with pure intention, may Brahma, Indra, and the world's guardians and protectors such as Mahakala unswervingly always assist me. So with this, we're done with this short teaching on the text. So this question comes from Sara, a college student, Kesan Thekchok. So with this verse for long life of His Holiness, so and with due respect to Your Holiness and Tashitelek, so though everyone do not want suffering, but the not want suffering but want happiness, and Shanti Devas in his says that although the beings wish to rid of suffering, they run after suffering. Although they want happiness, they destroy it like destroying one's enemies. So since all beings are equal in wanting, desiring happiness and not desiring suffering, how should we cultivate, elevate suffering and accomplish happiness? And so because of one's imprints from the past life, and also because of our innate wish for happiness and not wanting suffering, we have this. So with regard to overcoming suffering and cultivating happiness, the Buddha himself gave different teachings according to the temperaments of the different disciples. And he turned the three wheels of Dharma. So though all his so though they had the same teacher, the Buddha, because of their different mental dispositions, the Buddha gave teachings that are different in the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. So though they are meant as a method for alleviating suffering and cultivating happiness, they were. So because of the difference in the brain or the workings of one's brain or mind, the Buddha gave certain teachings for some, and for others, other teachings. So, for example, it's like taking different medicines by different beings. Because of their, though the sickness may be same, but different people need different medicine as well. And then there are different religious traditions. There are those of the theistic religions, the followers of which actually keep their faith in God. So this is their way of overcoming suffering and cultivating happiness. For Muslims, they pray to Allah, and similarly, according to the different mental dispositions of their followers, there are different means that are used. So there should be these different means for different people with different mental dispositions. There are 7 billion people on this earth, and then they have various mental dispositions, and their climatic conditions they live in are also, the environmental conditions are also different. And then the tradition that have been passed down to different people from their forebears are also different. So today we can see amazing Christian practitioners whom we can see, and similarly these amazing practitioners exist amongst the Jews, Muslims, and so forth. And so by practicing their religion, there are people who are very gentle, peaceful, and who are dedicated in the service of their communities and other people. Though these religions are meant for overcoming suffering and achieving happiness, because of these differences in climate, in mental dispositions, and cultural differences and so forth, we need different methods for different people. Next, it's Yeshil Hamo from Sarah College. With due respect to Your Holiness, what is the best means to cultivate love and compassion within oneself? So, His Holiness read another question that was displayed. So when people show jealousy, when people are jealous, so how to cultivate patience, love and compassion towards others is the question. So in Tibetan, we have Master Shantideva's Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, which is the best book for these practices. So there is the practice of equalizing and exchanging self and others. Cultivating bodhicitta through the sevenfold means of the instruction on the cause and effect, which includes recognizing all sentient beings as having been one's mother and so forth. But the best means to cultivating love, compassion and so forth is the method of equalizing and exchanging self and others, where Master Shantideva says, unless we switch one's own joy and happiness with the suffering of others, there would be no attainment of Buddhahood. Even in samsara, there will not be happiness. And so, because of our self-cherishing attitude, extreme self-centeredness, and neglecting others' happiness, there are all kinds of problems. For example, if you look at the life of Mahatma Gandhi, we can see how he lived a very simple life for himself, but he was dedicated for India. And then we also see people, and therefore Indians, not only Indians, also people around the world actually admire his principles of non-violence. And therefore, if we see, anywhere in the world, when people see someone or others who are dedicated for the well-being of others, they are admired. And so for us as Tibetans, we should study Master Shantideva's Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, where Shantideva says that those provoking anger or creating problems for us should be actually considered as our spiritual teachers. So, in relation to the Buddha and our spiritual masters, we cannot practice patience, but we can practice patience in relation to people who cause us problems. And therefore, those people whom we consider as our enemies give us the opportunity to practice patience, and therefore Shantideva says that they are our spiritual teachers, the best spiritual teachers for practicing patience. And so the chapter 6, which is the chapter on patience, and then chapter 8, the title of which is meditation. But it teaches that of the practice of altruism, bodhicitta. So I do reflect on the practice of patience using the 6th chapter of Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, which teaches, where there is a lot of teachings on how to cultivate patience in relation to one's enemies. And then studying the chapter 8, you'll find that there's no other way than actually practicing the equaling and exchanging self and others. So the main practice for purification of negativities and cultivation of wholesome actions lies in bodhicitta. So there is a self-cherishing attitude within which there could be one which is the afflicted self-cherishing attitude, and then there are those which are non-afflicted self-cherishing attitudes, which are within those of the arahats, of the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddha arahats. And then there is this self-grasping. So you have your body, speech, and mind, and we also have this notion of some kind of an agent governing our body, speech, and mind. So in your case, where is that agent? So one time, last year, some Tibetan lady came to see me, and she was feeling very unhappy, very disturbed. And I asked her, where is that I that you are referring to? And she said, she pointed to her heart. And then I asked her whether it's a square or spherical. She said it's spherical. But when you actually try to search for yourself within the mind and the body, I mean, there's nothing that you will not be able to find it at all. So jealousy and arrogance and so forth actually obstructs us in our progress on the spiritual path. So on the one hand, we should think of the advantages of cherishing others over cherishing oneself, and see the faults of cherishing oneself alone. And then also, because of this grasping at some kind of an independent I, we should cultivate the path that counters it as well. And so, cherishing others over oneself and bodhicitta, and then the wisdom realizing selflessness are our paths. In any kind of a practice of Tantra, in the beginning, we always come across the meditation on emptiness with Swabhava, Shuddha, and so forth. And so, this wisdom realizing emptiness should be able to counter this grasping at an independent self. So in Tantra, unless you are able to meditate on emptiness and from within that state meditation on emptiness arise in the form of a deity, there is no way you can actually overcome this grasping at true existence of a self. So in Tibet, Tantra has become widespread. So whether you use the Sanskrit mantra Om Swabhava Shuddha Sarvadhamma Swabhava Shuddhaham, or in Tibetan, where we find in some texts that all phenomena lack any independent existence and so forth. So Master Sangye Yeshe Buddha Yana, in his Drupta Kunzang, has mentioned this. So it's important to study the treatises. So, regarding the extensive path, you should study Bodhisattva Charyavatara, and for the profound path, you should study Mula Madhyamaka Karika and Madhyamaka Avatara. You should work hard in studying them. So in our tradition, we usually talk about doing 3-month retreat, but that that would be like a communist Chinese propaganda. If you look at the life of Chetan Milarepa, he went through lots of hardships in order to become enlightened. So we cannot expect to become enlightened within 3 years, 3 months. So there's no way we can become enlightened within this one lifetime through 3-month retreat and so forth. But we should think of becoming enlightened in the long run, thinking of working over a long period of time, for eons and eons, as it is said in the prayers, as long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remain, and so forth. And then also, and when you actually practice with a far-sighted vision, then it makes difference in working, however many hardships you may face. Next is Lama, the student Deki Dharma. So thank you for your Holiness's dedication for the world. So from the four commitments of Your Holiness, which one can we as students practice or fulfill? So when I talk about my four major commitments, I'm speaking as a human being, not as the Dalai Lama. So the first, there are 7 billion people on this earth, and I'm one of them. As the scientists say, we are social beings, social animals. So whatever social beings there are, the individuals always have this love towards the community. So therefore, as human beings, our happiness also is dependent or relied upon the community. So the world, the Eastern, regarding the world, East is dependent on the West, America and Europe and so forth, and they too are dependent on the East. When it comes to economics or economy, we don't make differences between the East and West. So everyone is related. So not only should we think of the external material development and economic development and so forth, but realize that love and compassion are the sources of our happiness. And when you have love and compassion, the community that you live in also would be happy. So without thinking about in religious terms, but thinking from the scientific point of view, my first commitment is promoting happiness or compassion in the world. And the second commitment, my second commitment is religious harmony. Though philosophically the religions differ, but the main message of all religious traditions is love, compassion, tolerance, self-discipline, contentment, and so forth. So because all of these religions are helpful to humanity and the different people following them, we should think of bringing harmony amongst the religious followers. So there may be, in India, for example, there is a very good harmony among the religious traditions, although there may be pockets of people causing differences, causing disturbances here and there. Our next door neighbors, and Syria, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, there are fightings in the name of religion, and within Muslim, the Shia and Sunni Whereas in India, though the different people of the different religions follow their own religion, there is a very good harmony amongst all these religions in India. So, based on the common practice of love, compassion, and so forth, there is every reason for us to live in harmony despite the philosophical differences. I have friends amongst the Christians, Hindus and others, and also Muslims, so who are dedicated for the well-being of society. And so this is bringing harmony among religions is my one of my commitments. And thirdly, as a Tibetan, though I have retired from the political authority, the political affairs, we as Tibetans follow the democratic process of electing our leaders, political leadership. Unlike the communist China, a totalitarian nation. And then I also have the responsibility towards the Tibetan cultural tradition, which is one of the best traditions in the world today. So this was introduced to us by Master Shandarakshita, and we are following this Nalanda tradition, which emphasizes study of Buddhist philosophy through logic and reason, and this tradition exists amongst Tibetans alone, this Nalanda tradition. There's none other Buddhist followers of the Buddhist tradition who have this tradition. Where in the Pali tradition, they more or less base themselves on the scriptural quotations, whereas Master Shandarakshita brought the Nalanda tradition to Tibet, and he introduced it to us, or entrusted. So the Master Shandarakshita wrote text on Madhyamaka, such as the ornament of the middle way. And also he introduced the Tatuv Samgraha, which is a text on epistemology. And therefore, in Tibet, there developed this term called the crossed necks of the two lines of Madhyamaka and epistemology. And so this tradition of using reasoning, the path of reasoning, to demonstrate the truth of the teaching of the Buddha exists in the Tibetan tradition alone. And so if we resorted to mere scriptural citations, I mean, we cannot have this kind of extensive dialogues with scientists, whereas we are able to do that because of our this profound and rich tradition of using logic and reasoning. And then with regard to the Tibetan language, Thömisam Bodha devised the Tibetan writing system during the time of King Songtsen Gampo. And therefore, Master Shandarakshita, when he was in Tibet, he said, you have your own writing system, and therefore you should translate the texts in the Sanskrit and Indian languages into your own language. So it was at the exhortation of him, Shantarakshita, that Tibetans now have the over 100 volumes of the Kanjur, the translated words of the Buddha, and over 220 volumes of Tenjur, the translated exegetical treatises. As the translations were carried out in Tibet, lots of new words had to be coined based on the Sanskrit terms, and therefore the Tibetan became rich in vocabulary. And so you, the younger generation, of course you do take interest in our cultural tradition, and you should still keep up with that. And after coming to exile, we requested the first Indian Prime Minister, Pandit Nehru, to open separate schools for Tibetan children. And therefore, it's very important for us to preserve our language, because this language is the best language for explaining the Buddhist philosophy, logic, psychology that are in the Buddhist literature. And so, no other language has that ability, and therefore this is my responsibility, that is to preserve the Tibetan language, in which we have preserved the profound and the vast traditions of the Nalanda monastic institution of India. And then Tibetan environment is another of my responsibilities. So in India, for example, in Tibet we have the sources of Ganga, Indus River, Brahmaputra, and so preserving Tibetan ecology is not only the welfare of, not only in the interest of the Tibetan people, the 6 million Tibetans, but ecology, preserving the ecology has to do with over 1 billion people who survive on the rivers that flow from Tibet. And then the fourth commitment is, as we have preserved the ancient Indian knowledge, I have this aspiration to reintroduce the ancient Indian tradition in India itself. And so the education system today in India, the material development alone, for example, is not enough for bringing about happiness to people. And the modern education seems to be focusing more or less on the material development, which gives some physical or sensorial gratification. And so this to bring about mental happiness within our mind by tackling the emotions and so forth, which is lacking in modern education system, and this must be made up in the Indian education system. Therefore, I'm thinking of reviving the ancient Indian knowledge within India. So there will be a meeting of this Tibet support group sometime later. So I had a discussion with the Sikyong, the Lobsang Singye, and so we will be talking about these four different these commitments. Next is a question from Dechen. On behalf of the students and the staff of Suja's school, I wish to thank Your Holiness for your dedication to the well-being of all people, and may you live long. And so the question is,
지금 미르 편도 지하다 지금 삼류탄에 지금 미르 럽지야다 천지군념도를 가지고 적해야지 아주 배벌을 마도 믿어가 죄송아 죄송가 양 아주 배벌 매일 배벌 소소 뽑아 제셔가지고 아주 제
So how can we cultivate spiritual path which is beneficial for oneself and others while still maintaining a sense of patriotic solidarity with our fellow Tibetans? So as I have been meeting many people, scientists, I have been able to find and see that the Tibetan cultural tradition is something which we can actually make contribution to the world at large, not only thinking of us Tibetans. So not through attachment or patriotism to our own people. So because we have a potential from our own cultural tradition to contribute to the world at large, this should give us pride. Because we are able to help others from our tradition. So this, we should whip up our courage by learning our own cultural tradition. For example, a teacher in a school cannot take pride if he or she is not able to actually teach what he is supposed to teach, if he doesn't have the knowledge of the subject that he is supposed to teach. So for us, there is a reason for us to be proud of our own nation, our own culture and tradition. So in the beginning, when we came into exile, we were more or less strangers without anyone to help us. We were kind of stranded. But today, the situation has completely changed to such an extent that people are able to see the quality of our tradition and religion. So therefore, the value of, to speak in terms of economics, the people are able to see the value of our tradition. So in Tibet, in the past, we as Tibetans preserved this rich cultural tradition in our own land, but today, people are able to see how deep and and vast this tradition is, and therefore even modern scientists are taking interest in learning from our tradition. And in the past, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition was called Lamaism, as if it was not an authentic teaching of the Buddha, but something that the Lamas made up. But we can today see, when we are in the global arena, people are able to see the value of our tradition and religion, and therefore respect us. Next is the question from Dharamsala from Suja Tibetan school. Taking this opportunity, I pay my due respect to His Holiness and express Teshi Delek. So when we say that everything, pain and pleasure, has resulted from karma, we get a sense that karma cannot be avoided or changed. How do things come into being from karma, past karma, and the immediate conditions? So basically, the pain and pleasure in this life can be attributed to karma. So karma can be karma from the past life or this life. And then there is the immediate conditions, so which are in this life. And therefore, whatever karma we may have created in the past, the fact that it gives rise to its the result is also dependent on the condition that we face. So it's very difficult for us to actually differentiate between which is the karma and which is the immediate condition as such. But mainly because of past karma, but also due to certain conditions in this life, even if when we become sick, we actually take medicines. So though our sickness has connection with our past life, yet because it also is dependent on the immediate condition, we should not neglect taking care of our health by not taking medicine when we become sick. But if you come to such a situation where you can do nothing about it, then you can say, oh, it's my karma to suffer this. And so when you become unhappy, thinking along that line, saying, oh, it's my karma now, I cannot do anything about it, then it actually helps to not get disturbed. And those believing in theistic, creator God, keep their faith in God. And so with regard to karma, there are the karmas created through one's body, speech, and mind. And then with regard to the cooperative conditions, there are the internal and external conditions as well. So we should not neglect our health to avoid meeting with the immediate cooperative condition. Whereas when you have nothing to, when you cannot do anything about your problems, then it would be best to, it would be okay to say it's my karma now. Next is a question from Sangye Tinle from the Central Tibetan Institute of Highest Tibetan Studies. With due respect to you, Holiness, and Tashi direct to you. So how do we
치료 경pen바 남기자 말 부기와다 뉴고 사벌네 개와 또베 텐데도바 테도도 데나 텐데도바 개와당네 마도바 토안데 퀴기로셰베 아나 치료번나 마도베 텐지 임바 송나도 디카이고 칼롭치나로 제나 슈엔
그래서 치료 그래서
So how do we actually realize dependent origination? If by dependent origination we refer to causality alone, then non-Buddhist traditions also do seem to understand that. So with regard to non-Buddhist traditions, the Charavakas don't believe in causality, whereas the Jains, followers of Jainism and Sankhyaism, don't assert a creator God, though they do say that pain and pleasure arise through external conditions, but mainly through internal causes. So those actions which are influenced by our afflictive emotions, and therefore it is said that subduing one's mind, there is happiness. Unsubdued mind brings about suffering. So if you are disturbed, if your mind is disturbed through jealousy, arrogance, and so forth, there is going to be unhappiness as a result of that. So what disturbs our mind is the grasping at the self-cherishing attitude, and this in turn could be traced to the root cause, which is that of grasping at some kind of an independent, autonomous self, which seems to be like a ruler over our body and mind. So if you are able to reduce this grasping, the more you are able to do that, because of clinging to some kind of a solid I or me, due to which we tend to see things outside as if they have having some kind of solid existence. So quantum physicists, of course, they do not talk about the mind as such, but they do talk about the external things and say that things appear to us to exist objectively. But if you go down to the subtle atomic, subatomic particles, they say nothing exists objectively. So our mental afflictions arise because of how we cling to what appears to our mind, which is that they have some kind of a self-defined nature. And accordingly, by clinging to that self-defined nature in things, we develop the negative, that of the inappropriate mentation, which gives rise to the mental afflictions. Whereas when you are able to see that things do not exist the way they appear to us, this mental inappropriate thinking also reduces, and in turn, and thereby the afflictive emotions also are reduced. So in China, some professors of Lentu University have read the books that we have brought out from here, published in here, on Buddhist science,
quantum physics,
and they have found that the Tibetan Buddhist tradition belongs to the Nalanda tradition, and that it is scientific. And then quantum physicists, some Chinese quantum physics students have actually said that when you are able to feel convinced from the depths of your heart that nothing objectively exists, it helps to reduce one's reaction to, emotional reaction to things. And so Master Nagarjuna says, the karma and delusions arise from the conceptual thought. And Master Nagarjuna also says our attachment, anger, and delusion or confusion arises through this the exaggerated outlook on things. So to reduce this self-grasping, we can reflect on selflessness of things, that things do not have any substantial independent or substantial autonomous existence. For example, and then you can also think along think about the 12 links of dependent origination, and to understand that things are dependently originated, which in turn helps to reduce clinging to some independent or nature in things. And the Buddha himself was said to have instructed to draw the 12 links of dependent origination. So it begins with ignorance and ends with aging and death in the outer circle, and then within that circle, in the second circle, there are those of the higher and lower realms of existence. And then inside that, in the third circle, there are those of the higher realm and lower realms of existence. And then in the center, most part of that, there are the three animals: a pig, a rooster, and a snake, representing our three poisons. And so these three, the three poisons of attachment, hatred, and ignorance, are the sources of the rest of the cycle. So within that ignorance, there is a mere confusion of things, mere not knowing, and then another one which is a misconception of reality. And this can be overcome through, should be overcome through understanding selflessness, regarding which Master Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika says It is not the Tathagata is neither the aggregates nor distinct from them. They are not, the Tathagata is not in them, neither, nor they are in the Tathagata. Are they in the Tathagata? Tathagata doesn't possess the aggregates. What else is Tathagata? And so I usually use this verse and switch Tathagata with the word referring to me. I am not the aggregates, not distinct from the aggregates. I'm not in the aggregates, nor the aggregates are in me. I don't possess the aggregates. What am I, or who am I? So through this kind of analysis, you cannot find a self distinct from the aggregates. In other words, a self which is not designated on the basis of the aggregates. Whereas the non-Buddhist traditions do assert an Atman, which is regarded as an agent distinct from the mind and body aggregates. And they don't assert selflessness as such, whereas selflessness is something that the Buddhist traditions asserts. So within the Buddhist tradition, we have the four schools of philosophy, whereas with regard to the final identity of a person or a being, apart from the Prasangikas, the rest of the schools somehow posit something from amongst the aggregates to be the person's identity. For example, the Savatantrika Madhyamakas do still assert the sixth or the mental consciousness as being the identity of the person, and Chittamatras to do assert that of an alaya vijnana, the foundational consciousness. So in Madhyamaka Avatara, if it says, if you analyze or try to search for the person or the identity of a person or things, you cannot find anything as being this or that. But they exist by way of a designation through labels and conceptions. And so, Master, the Madhyamaka say that
대남싱대 남자집에 남도이와 모인싱 부모 너부르데 마다나서 정원에서 마송데 슈구데.
So Master Chandra Kirti says that things such as Vas and so forth, when they're analyzed through the sevenfold reasoning, you cannot find anything as being their identity, and but they do exist by way of convention, worldly convention. So apart from that, nothing can be found to have any essential existence in and of them itself. So because things can be posited or established through mere designation, we can talk about causes and conditions, karma and their effects, and so forth. And therefore, because things are designated through dependence, we can refute any essential existence in them.
아니 장죽선데 딱와 공부 시부지 편도도
So I do meditate on emptiness and also bodhicitta on a daily basis, and they're very beneficial, very helpful. So those of the attachment, anger, and so forth can be, the intensity can be reduced through the meditation on understanding of emptiness, and the clinging to or cherishing one's own well-being, self-cherishing attitude is reduced through the meditation on equaling and exchanging self and others, bodhicitta. Next, the director of TCV schools, Sudim Dorjila, would like is going to.
가서 식들 대변당의 던지던 보다 시원한 던지시면 이전당의 게 뭐 표시를 내고 최근 시행기면서
So somebody had reported that His Holiness skipped one verse.
얘네 나가는 시기에 장진진 럭견때 현지지 연대생 수매디
So amongst teachers, the teacher who taught dependent origination, verse number 37. Among teachers, the teacher of dependent origination, among wisdom, the knowledge of dependent origination. You who are most excellent, like the kings in the world, know this perfectly well, and not others. So, Your Holiness, you are the champion of peace in the world and the supreme leader of the Tibetan people, emanation of Avalokiteshvara in human form. So during these 3 days, you have given a very extensive and profound teaching to our youth based on Master Tsongkhapa's text in praise of the Buddha for teaching the dependent origination. So I would like to thank Your Holiness for graciously accepting our request to give teaching on dependent origination during these difficult times due to the coronavirus pandemic. So I'd like to thank Your Holiness, the concerned officials of Gadinpot, the office of His Holiness Dalai Lama, and I would also thank all the participants. And 36 students have been able to so many of the students who had questions have not been able to ask questions. So I'd like to thank everyone and His Holiness. I would like to pray for His Holiness' long life. And I pray that the next teaching for the Tibetan youth may be possible from Podangpoda La. This is a dedication verse from the Samantabhadra prayer. And then, so like the Manjushri, Samantabhadra, and so forth. And then these lines of prayer from the words of truth.
예.
In brief, just as Avalokiteshvara has prayed,
다 잘하고.